You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Asians in Hockey podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Nate Nikau. Before we get started, I have a quick announcement. As you might have noticed from the stinger at the start of this episode, Asians in Hockey has joined the Potluck Podcast Collective. Potluck is a collective of independent Asian American podcasters who have come together to highlight stories, voices, and perspectives from the Asian diaspora. From discussions about pop culture to narratives about our shared histories and heritage, Potluck's shows aim to entertain, elevate, and build community by amplifying and supporting Asian diaspora voices through podcasting. For more info and to check out their other shows, visit podcastpotluck.com. Today's episode features 3 periods of hockey talk as usual, so let me give you a rundown of what we'll be chatting about today. To start things off, we're going to have a very unique player profile, and if you're familiar with Asian hockey history, you'll either chuckle, cringe, or rage at this name, Taro Tsujimoto. Yep. We're going to be talking about this controversial player. In the second period, I'll introduce you to the sport of hockey. Now, given that hockey isn't known as a very Asian-heavy sport, it's entirely likely that you're listening to this podcast wondering what the hell I'm talking about when I mention terms like time on ice, hits, or point per game. We'll go over a bunch of that stuff so that if this podcast has inspired you to take an interest in actually watching the game, you'll at least have a base of understanding that you can draw from. And finally, in the third period, we'll chat with another new friend of the show, Chris Wu, the curator and writer behind the popular Instagram account Asian Hockey Card Collection and the website of the same name. The account and website are invaluable resources for our community, and I'm excited for you to hear the amazing conversation we had. All of that is ahead right after this.
And I co-host the podcast Asians in Baseball alongside Naomi Ko and Scott Okamoto. Asians in Baseball is exactly what it sounds like, a podcast about the Asian and Asian Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Americans in Major League Baseball. Every week, we break down the highlights of what's going on with Asians in baseball and then take a deeper dive into the Asian and Asian Americans past and present who have shaped baseball as it is today. Whether you're Kim Ng's #1 fan or you've never even heard of Hideo Nomo, we've got something for everyone, especially for the Shohei Ohtani stans. Maybe too much for the Shohei Ohtani stans. Listen to Asians in Baseball wherever you get podcasts, part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.
All right, let's drop the puck on this episode. To get things started, I'm going to share with you one of the more frustrating stories in Asian hockey history. So let's set the stage. At different points in the NHL's history, there were competing top-level hockey leagues in North America, including the Pacific Coast Hockey Association, or PCHA, that existed from 1912 to 1924 and actually predates the formation of the NHL by about 6 years. The Western Hockey League, or WHL, that existed from 1921 to 1926 and merged with the PCHA in 1924. And the World Hockey Association, or WHA, that existed from 1971 to 1979. At the formation of the WHA in 1971, the new competing league began signing players to their teams before the NHL could conduct their draft. Now, in response, then NHL Commissioner Clarence Campbell started conducting a secret over-the-phone draft in 1974, basically calling each individual team to let them know which players had been selected by other teams before them in the draft. This process took painstakingly long, lasting 25 rounds over the course of 3 days and drawing the ire of at least one NHL team's general manager. Punch Imlach, the GM of the Buffalo Sabres, grew frustrated with the process, so in the later rounds, he decided to have a little bit of fun. He asked his communications director, a man named Paul Wieland, to create a fictional hockey player that the Sabres could draft after selecting all their wanted players in the first 10 rounds. Wieland immediately got to work developing this hoax, knowing right away that the fictitious player would be from Japan and that his last name would be Tsujimoto, named after the owner of Wieland's favorite Japanese grocery store, Joshua Tsujimoto. Imlach's secretary called Tsujimoto, asking if the Sabres could use his last name, but neglected to indicate their purpose or intention. His secretary also asked about popular Japanese given names, and Tsujimoto replied with Taro. Imlach and Whelan then set about crafting a backstory for their player. Taro Tsujimoto was a 20-year-old forward from Osaka who put up 15 goals in the 1972-73 season. Tsujimoto played for the equally fictitious team, the Tokyo Katanas. Imlach had come up with the team name by finding the Japanese word that most closely approximated his own team name, the Sabres, since saber and katana both refer to types of swords. Taro Tsujimoto was selected by the Buffalo Sabres in the 11th round of the 1974 draft as the 183rd overall pick. The only NHL executives who knew about this ruse were Imlach and Whelan, so the draft continued as if nothing unusual had occurred. After the draft, several sports news outlets published the draft results, with many journalists taking note of the fact that the Sabres had drafted the first ever Japanese NHL prospect. Since this was during a time period when there was no NHL scouting in Asia and the internet didn't exist yet, there was no practical way for anyone to research whether Taro Tsujimoto or the Tokyo Katanas existed. As training camp grew closer, Tsujimoto was assigned a locker and jersey number 13 with the Sabres. When asked about Tsujimoto's whereabouts after training camp started, Imlach just stated that he wasn't sure that Tsujimoto would be able to come to North America in time for the 1974-75 season. After Imlach confessed to the hoax, the NHL changed the pick to an invalid selection for their official record-keeping purposes. The hoax itself would eventually become a very popular inside joke for Sabres fans, with many buying custom jerseys with Tsujimoto's name. During games, many fans would chant, "We want Taro." In 2019, Wieland published an autobiography titled Taro Lives, Confessions of the Sabres Hoaxer, in which he references the inside joke. In 2013, New Era produced Tokyo Katanas hats commemorating the 40th anniversary of the hoax, and 2 years earlier, the Panini Company released a Taro Tsujimoto trading card. While this elaborate hoax is certainly quite humorous, a couple frustrating points come to light. First is the fact that sports writers and journalists incorrectly labeled Tsujimoto as the first Asian player in the NHL when that was, in fact, Larry Kwong, who first broke that barrier in the league 26 years before Tsujimoto was drafted. Second is the fact that Panini has produced a Taro Tsujimoto NHL hockey card, while Kwong still has yet to receive a similar treatment for his appearance on the New York Rangers. The story of Taro Tsujimoto will undoubtedly entertain hockey fans for generations to come. But I do hope that when people discover the tale of this hoax, they'll be prompted to dig a bit deeper and find out more about the true history of Asians in hockey. And knowing that Larry Kwong was effectively robbed of the honors he should have received for breaking those barriers will, I hope, prompt you to recognize that it is truly Larry's turn to get the spotlight he deserves. If you want to learn more about Larry Kwong and his contributions to the game of hockey, please head back to episode 1 of this podcast for an overview of his playing career, as well as a conversation I had with Chad Soon, co-author of the book about Larry's life, The Longest Shot. And please sign the petition to induct Larry into the Hall of Fame. I'll link to it in this episode's show notes.
Life gets a little crazy sometimes. Sometimes it's confusing, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's beautiful, and sometimes it can just piss us off. Enter First of All Podcast. It's a safe space for real conversations about the things that we all struggle with, celebrate, contemplate, and work through in our daily lives. I'm your host, Mindy Chang. I'm an actor, filmmaker, and entrepreneur with a colorful background, a full life, and brilliant friends who I love to unpack life with to share with all of you. They are everyday people like you and me, ranging from award-winning artists, cultural icons, powerful CEOs, my hilarious childhood friends, and even my mom. Tune in for honest conversations on mental health, dating, sex, family, career, culture, and everything in between. Listen to First of All wherever you find podcasts, part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.
Welcome back to the show. So it's come to my attention that several of you listen to the podcast, not because you're hockey fans per se, but because you're interested in the history of Asians and Asian American, Asian Canadian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders in various predominantly white or white-controlled spaces. If that's you, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about when I mention player stats in terms like penalty minutes or shifts. Or maybe you're wondering what the difference is between a point and a goal. Well, in the second period of today's episode, I will attempt to demystify the sport a little bit for you and maybe even convince some of you to watch. So this is a bit challenging in a strictly audio format, but I'll do my best. If you aren't driving or if you're the passenger in a car, could I ask you a favor? Could you pull up a picture of an ice hockey rink and use that picture as a visual aid to follow along with this explainer? Hopefully that makes this a bit easier. In fact, I'll throw a link to a diagram of one in the show notes. And while you get it pulled up, I do want to mention that a common nickname for the ice is sheet, so you can probably expect me to use that term pretty often going forward. Okay, now that you have your hockey rink diagram in front of you, let's start by talking about the lines on the ice. The red line in the middle is the center ice line that divides the sheet in half. We often just call this the red line. The blue lines on either side of center ice are also simply called the blue line, and they mark off the 3 zones on a sheet. So if you're the team that's trying to score in the net on the right side of the ice, looking at the sheet from left to right, you have the defending zone between the left end of the ice and the leftmost blue line, the neutral zone between the 2 blue lines, and the attacking zone between the rightmost blue line and the right end of the ice. The 2 red lines on either end of the ice are called the goal lines, and if the puck crosses the line while within the confines of the net, that counts as a goal. In front of each net is a blue area called the crease. The crease is a designated safe area for the goaltender where they're permitted to play the puck in any way they want without interference from opposing players. The goalie crease entry rule varies drastically from league to league, and everyone who watches and plays hockey has different opinions about how rules about the crease are interpreted, and there have been changes to the rules here in the past 20 years, so don't worry if this section of the ice confuses you. You're not alone. In front of the crease are 2 face-off circles with a face-off dot in the middle of each. There are 4 of these on the ice, 2 in front of each crease. These are where face-offs take place after specific stoppages in play, such as when a goalie covers the puck or if a team ices the puck. Speaking of icing, let me explain that one briefly. The rule varies depending on the level of hockey, but in the NHL, icing is a violation that takes place when an attacking player sends the puck across the goal line outside of the goal itself from a position behind center ice, and a defending player arrives at the puck before an attacking player does. When an icing occurs, a face-off takes place in the face-off circle in front of the crease of the goalie whose team committed the icing offense. Also, the offending team is not allowed to change players if they ice the puck. Back to the face-off dots. There are 5 face-off dots in the neutral zone, 1 at center ice and 2 just behind each blue line. Face-offs at center ice take place after a goal or to start off each period. Face-offs at the other neutral zone dots take place after specific stoppages, such as offside. And speaking of offside, it is, thankfully, much simpler than in soccer. Basically, the puck needs to be the first thing to cross the blue line, so if an attacking player crosses the blue line before the puck, the play is offside and a face-off takes place within the neutral zone. Those are some of the main features of a hockey rink. There are other details, but they aren't really necessary to know if you want to just get started watching the sport. Okay, you can put your diagram away now. Now let's talk about the basic rosters. Each team can bring 20 players to a game, 18 skaters and 2 goaltenders. The skaters are broken down as follows: 6 defenders and 12 forwards. The forwards are broken down even further as 4 centers and 8 wingers. During the game, there are 6 players per team on the ice, 5 skaters and 1 goaltender. Unlike in basketball or soccer, where the game stops when substitutions are made, in hockey, Skater substitutions happen in the middle of the action every minute or so. This is referred to as changing on the fly. Forwards change in groups of 3, also called lines, and lines are made up of a center and 2 wingers, and there are usually 4 lines in a game. Defenders change in groups of 2, also called pairings. There are usually 3 pairings in a game, and they take slightly longer shifts than forwards do. And speaking of shifts, a shift is a given chunk of time players spend on the ice before changing out. Oh, and if you're curious, the top line or top 2 lines on most teams are going to be your high-scoring lines. This is where your most talented skaters and shooters are usually featured. Goaltenders almost never change during the game. A second goaltender is usually on the bench as a backup in case of injury or an especially bad game from the starting goalie. Now let's switch to talking about the format of a game and the on-ice action. A hockey game takes place over the course of 3 20-minute periods with an 18-minute intermission for resurfacing the ice between the first and second periods and between the second and third periods. The objective of the game is to score more goals than the other team at the end of the 60 minutes of play. The team that scored the most goals at the end of those 60 minutes wins the game. If the score is still tied after 60 minutes, the game goes into overtime. In the NHL regular season, the overtime period is 5 minutes long and is played with just 3 skaters and a goalie per side. Overtime in hockey is played in a sudden death or golden goal format, wherein the first team to score a goal during overtime wins the game. If no one scores a goal during overtime, the game switches to a shootout format in which skaters take turns going one-on-one with the opposing goalie. A shootout consists of 3 rounds, and the team with the most goals after 3 rounds wins the game. If there's no winner after the 3 rounds, the shootout continues until someone wins. In the NHL regular season, a win earns the team 2 points, a loss earns the team no points, and a loss in overtime or a shootout earns the team 1 point. Teams with the most points at the end of the regular season qualify for the playoff tournament. In the PWHL regular season, a win earns the team 3 points, a loss earns no points, a loss in overtime or a shootout earns 1 point, and a shootout or overtime win earns 2 points. Overtime in the playoffs is a bit different. It's played as full 5-on-5 20-minute periods until someone scores a goal. No more 3-on-3 play, no more shootouts. You just keep on playing until someone scores. Okay, let's move on to penalties. Penalties are one of the more unique features of a hockey game. While every sport has its own sets of consequences for infractions, with the exception of soccer's red card, I can't think of another type of infraction that has such an interesting effect on a team's strategy as the major and minor penalties in hockey. During a game, teams might commit infractions that are punishable by a penalty. Without going into any detail about the specific penalties, because that could take up a whole episode itself, a penalty is simply an infraction that leads to a disadvantage on the ice for a set amount of time, usually 2 minutes, but if the infraction is especially egregious, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or even ejection. If a player commits a minor or a major penalty, that player is sent to the penalty box for 2 minutes or 4 minutes, respectively, and their team has to play with only 4 skaters for the duration of the penalty. The team whose player committed the infraction is said to be shorthanded or on the penalty kill, while the opposing team is said to be on the power play. If a player commits a misconduct, only the player is penalized. They're sent to the box for 10 minutes, but the teams technically remain at even strength, 5-on-5. If a player commits a game misconduct, they're ejected for the remainder of the game, and similar to a misconduct, the teams technically remain at even strength, 5-on-5. I say technically because more often than not, misconduct and game misconduct penalties are the result of a minor or major penalty, which would result in a power play for the opposing team. The most common major penalty is fighting, which does not carry an on-ice team disadvantage. The teams remain at 5-on-5 for the duration of the penalty. A 2-minute minor penalty can end early if the team on the power play scores a goal. In the PWHL, the penalized team can also end the penalty early by scoring a goal. Okay, now that we've talked about the game format and penalties, let's go over some of the individual player stats tracked over the course of a season. The most commonly discussed player stats are the scoring stats, which are called points. Players can earn a point for each play that directly results in a goal. Goals and assists earn a point for the player, and players can only earn 1 point per scoring play. So let's use our captain's stats as an example. During the 2024-25 regular season, Nick Suzuki scored 30 goals and had 59 assists. He earned a point for each of those, so he had an 89-point season. After points, we have plus minus. Plus minus tracks a player's impact on their team's goal differential during even strength and shorthanded situations. A player receives a +1 if their team scores a goal while they're on the ice, and a -1 if their team concedes a goal while they're on the ice. The difference between the total number of plus and minus a player has throughout a season is called their plus-minus rating. Having a positive plus-minus is obviously quite a good thing. There are plenty of other player stats that are tracked, such as face-off wins and losses, hits, blocks, penalty minutes, which is specific to that player's time spent in the box, shifts, time on ice, and much more. We won't bother with the rest of them in today's episode, but if there's anything you're curious about, please feel free to send me a message. Oh, and if I happen to get anything wrong, or if you have any disputes or different opinions, also, please send me a message. I hope this period has helped you gain a little bit of understanding about the sport, and if you're not already watching it, maybe this has given you a bit more confidence to give it a try. And what better time than right now during the Stanley Cup playoffs, which is arguably one of the most exciting seasons of any major sport. And in hockey, the playoffs are a different season. Okay, when we come back for period 3, we'll have a conversation with the man behind Hockey Card Collection, Chris Wu. We'll be right back.
Hey Brian, did you go to Saturday school as a kid?
I sure did. Did you?
Totally.
Well, at our podcast, Saturday School, we don't teach a language, but we pass along the culture that we do know.
And that's Asian American pop culture.
Ada's a journalist, and I'm a professor and film festival programmer.
We've watched a lot of great Asian American movies, and we want you to watch them too. Come listen to us as we look back at the pioneering films that have led us to today.
Hey, so quick note before we dive into this conversation. I had planned on profiling Taro Tsujimoto for this episode, but I didn't know at the time that Chris and I were talking that I would be pairing my conversation with him with this player profile. Chris brings up Tsujimoto at some point during our conversation, and then I refer to a future episode. Well, that future episode that I talk about, it's this one. Anyway, here's my conversation with Chris. All right, for the third period today, I am joined by Chris Wu. Chris is the person behind the Asian Hockey Card Collection Instagram account and the Asian Hockey Card Collection website. Chris has been curating this collection of Asian hockey cards for a while now. But before we even get to that, I do want to ask you, well, first of all, welcome to the show, Chris. I'm so glad you're here.
No, thanks, Nate. Thanks for reaching out to me. I'm excited to be on here. I'm excited to be on your podcast because it's a great topic, and I do feel like as Asians, there is a strong population within hockey, both professionally and even in minor kids games as well. But we are often the visible minority, so it's great to use your platform to try to bring this enlightenment to the masses.
Thank you. So let's start with your experience in hockey. How did you get into hockey? I know you're not from a part of the continent that's like really known for a whole lot, historically known for a whole lot of hockey. Obviously, nowadays that's a little different. But when you were growing up, were you really exposed to the game a whole lot, or was that something that you had to go out of your way to get a hold of?
You're right. I was born and raised in Southern California, and it wasn't really a hockey hotbed in the 80s when I was a kid. And then how I got into it was my dad was a huge Kings fan. And at the time, they didn't have nationally telecast hockey games. I mean, we had the Kings on prime ticket at times, but you'd see games every now and then. But my dad would had season seats with a friend, and I think I was in second grade at one point, and my dad had said, his friend had bailed on him, and he had this extra ticket, and he didn't know what to do. So I told him, I'll go. And I didn't even know what hockey was, really. He took me, I think it was the Kings versus the Rangers. I had a great time. But then what really spurred it in me was then the next day, I think it was the game must have been on a Sunday, because it was on a Monday. My second grade teacher, Mrs. Johnson, pulled the class together and asked what everybody did the night before. And, I raised my hand and I said I went to a hockey game, and she said, "Oh, did you see Marcel?" And I didn't know she was talking about Marcel Dion. I said, yeah, I did. I was in second grade. She goes, "Well, did you see Luke?" And I said, she's meaning Luke Robitaille. And I said, "Yeah, he was there." And Jimmy, did you see Jimmy? And I was like, "Yeah." And it turns out that that was the rookie season for Luke Robitaille and Jimmy Carson, and they were living with Marcel Dion at the time. We were all on the Kings.
Oh, okay,
and
okay.
They were her next door neighbors, the next door neighbors, and she ended up getting me a signed photo of Marcel Dion. I still have it in my.
That's incredible.
Office. Yeah, and that's how I became a hockey fan. I was instantly hooked. Following the Kings since then. I mean, I was in second grade. Obviously, when the Gretzky got traded to the Kings, it was
right. Oh, that's when it blew up, of course, for Southern California.
Huge boom. I mean, ice hockey rinks and roller hockey rinks popped out all over the place. I mean, we had the Pro Beach roller hockey, we had the RHI roller hockey professionals, we had everything. So it really boomed. And with Gretzky, and of course, you're a Habs fan. We lost the Habs that one year with Marty McSorley's stick. But then we
Yep.
We've been getting a couple cups after that. And so I've been a hockey fan since. I also grew up playing hockey. I mean, mostly roller, because we didn't have many ice rinks. I was on a tournament roller hockey team with a lot of my friends from elementary school all the way through high school. I became a pretty competitive roller hockey tournament team where we were going to national tournaments. We were sponsored. One year we were sponsored by Nissan. Another year we were going to get sponsored by Nike, but then we ended up losing in the game and then losing the sponsorship. So, man. But it was, after that, after high school, then I went to go play I went to UCLA, undergrad. And I tried out for the ice hockey team there. It's a club team, but an ACHA. And I ended up playing 3 years there. I didn't play my freshman year because I wasn't comfortable on the ice yet. It took a whole year to train on the ice, go to stick times, and work out with the guys. And I made it my second year. Okay. Played all 3 years there. And then my final year, I was an alternate captain for them. And it was a great time. Yeah.
Nice. A little bit the reverse of me. I still have not figured out how to stop on rollerblades. So I need the ice. I can't get comfortable on wheels playing the game. But so I barely even tried. I think I did roller hockey maybe twice, and I'm like, oh, this does not feel comfortable for me. I need to practice on this surface.
I feel it's tougher for people who started with ice. I mean, I started with roller, and then I went to ice. It was easy transition, but then ever since I went to ice, I probably played roller a few times after college. Never felt comfortable after that. I mean, because you're right, you worry about breaking your ankles, and sliding too hard. But it was just weird. I think I can't go back to roller after going on to ice.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your involvement with, your starting of this Instagram account and website, the Asian Hockey Card Collection. What spurred this on? And I know this conversation is going to be a little bit interesting because when people think of hockey cards or baseball cards or football cards, they think of this sort of childhood nostalgia. They think of, kids with their collections. I remember as a kid, riding my bike around on a cul-de-sac, and you always had that kid in your little entourage that stuck the baseball cards in the spokes of his wheels. So, so for me, I think of sports cards, trading cards, and I think of childhood. But I feel like, and we've talked about this a little bit even offline, that this whole curation, this collection here, has so much more depth and meaning. But let's just start with the basics. Why hockey cards? How did this get started?
Yeah, I mean, so you're right. It's a very long subject, and I want to try to get into as much of it as possible. I mean, one with cards, like. Well, I mean, when I grew up at a time when when you grew up too, I'm a little older than you, but there weren't many Asians in hockey, right? I mean, in the NHL, there weren't many. Certainly, even when we were playing growing up, there weren't so many. And so, whenever I did see, an Asian hockey player like Jim Pack or Richard Park or Peter Ing, it kind of was, it felt special. And even then, when I stepped out on the ice or on the rink against another Asian player, I mean, it always kind of felt special. I don't know if you ever watched like Curb Your Enthusiasm, when Larry David with the bald guys, they give him what's up. I mean, it was sort of like that with Asians, and I felt like then when the puck dropped, we tried to kill each other, right? But no, so it was always special, right? And then. When it came to cards, I grew up at a time when there was we didn't have the internet, right? So a lot of what you've learned about players was from your locally telecast games, and then also reading in the newspapers and looking at the box scores. And I mean, I remember specifically, I think it was back in, like 91 or 93 when the Montreal Canadiens drafted the first player who was born in Japan, Hiroyuki Miura. And they drafted him, and I remember seeing his name in the draft. And wow, it's a Japanese guy. And going, well, I wonder what he looks like. I mean, I wonder what kind of player he is. I tried to, I would try to find out, what his stats were. I'm like, okay, he's not a big scorer, so he must be a defensive defenseman. Maybe he's kind of big, but trying to picture that. So then when it came to cards became sort of a resource for you because we didn't have the internet where you could just pull someone's stats up for their entire career. You'd have to go back to a card and you'd see, this guy played for the Penguins as well, and look at the cards and look at the stats, and you kind of learn about the player that way. It's a lot easier with the internet now because you can just look up anybody. But back in the day, you just had these cards. And to me, these cards became like almost like a piece of history. And it was an establishment of the player to show that the player has made it somewhere. Yeah. And so when I thought about like getting this collection together, I always had this interest about, there's probably a lot more Asians out there than people think that have played the game of hockey, minors, juniors, minors, and even pro. And it would be nice to share those sort of stories with people using the cards. Because the card, and quite often, especially with some of the older players, there's not many photos of those players anymore. Like Hiroyuki Miura, you can probably find like one or two photos. I've never seen him with the, Montreal Canadiens jersey or even in the North American minor leagues. So it's tough, but with a card, and I'm still looking for his card. There's a 1993, 1994 ECHL Wheeling Thunderbirds card that is very, very hard to find. And that's his only card in existence. But would give me an idea of like, okay, this is what he looked like back in the day. Yeah. That's kind of what spurred the account. And it was also, it came around the COVID times. At the time I was working and I had to, it was pretty stressful times. We were working on a major transaction. And then I was like, well, to get some sort of retail therapy, I started buying the cards. I'm like, I always wanted that collection of Asian players. So I just started buying random cards. I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll share the stories of these players on Instagram. And I thought, like, I don't know how many people are actually going to care about it, but at least I'll document it. Yeah. Because also, I mean, that was the other aspect was when I tried to look and do my research on the internet, there was no authoritative source. And some of the sources were completely wrong on players' ethnicities. And they'd be missing a ton of players. So I thought, well, it would be nice if there was like one comprehensive authoritative source where if anybody wanted to look up and figure out, okay, was it how many Chinese players were there? How many Thai players were there? They can look on the account and hopefully learn something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a needed resource, and I think of even the motivation that you had for this. It kind of reminds me. So I was listening to the Densho Project, they have a podcast out about the incarceration of the Japanese Americans. And in one of the episodes, they were talking about how leading up to the mass incarceration, as there were sort of rumors about this about to take place, a lot of Japanese Americans were afraid of the connections that could be made if the FBI came knocking on their door. They would look at their documents, their letters from family back in Japan, their any documents that could connect them back to the Japanese Empire or the motherland. They didn't want any of that stuff around as quote unquote incriminating evidence, so they burned it all. So a lot of that documentation and those rich stories about these family connections through generations are just lost. So I feel like that need to document our history as Asian Americans is so crucial, and something that you're doing with the Asian hockey card collection. Now, I know it's not nearly as perhaps as important, but in a way it is, right? Like, we exist in this sport, and it's so powerful to have something tangible as a reminder that, yeah, we're a part of the history of hockey in North America and across the world.
Oh, I mean, I completely agree with you. And as I mentioned, I do believe, and I don't mean it in a totally negative or pessimistic way, but we are a forgotten minority, especially when it comes to hockey. I mean, I know you had Chad Soon on your podcast, and I mean, that's a terrific example. I mean, no one would know Larry Kwong's story if it wasn't for Chad just digging it up, hearing stories from his grandfather. And that reminds me of a story. I remember when Jerome McGinley was named the Calgary Flames captain. I mean, great player, fun to watch, former King too. But the Hockey News did a huge piece on the first Black captain, and they made a big deal out of it. And I still remember I actually wrote to the Hockey News. I wrote an email to Steve Dryden, and I had mentioned, hey, this is great that we're writing about Jerome McGinley's first Black captain, but what about Paul Kariya? He was the first Asian captain, perhaps the first minority captain. And I wrote that, and surprisingly, they did publish it. It was in the print version of the Hockey News. They didn't publish it, but that kind of, it just shows that people do forget about us. I mean, Larry Kwong was 10 years before Willie O'Ree. Paul Kariya was before Jerome McGinley. And if you want to look back, I mean, 1975, Mike Wong was probably the first Asian hockey player drafted in the NHL, and he was actually part Native American, part Chinese. But he was a boxer too. But he was drafted by the Detroit Red Wings. But people forget about him. Whereas I think that Chad put it a lot more eloquently than me. I mean, they've done a great job with Willie, and Willie's done a great job for the NHL, but there were others before Willie that I think, and it's important that we do talk about these stories so people do remember them. Otherwise, Larry Kwong will have been forgotten. Mike Wong will have been forgotten. Paul Kariya, I don't think he'll ever be forgotten, but
no, he won't. For both good and bad reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, not like in anything that he did. Just you remember some of those hits that he took, and you're like, oh my god.
Yeah, that guy. I was at that game.
Were you at that game? Oh my god.
That was an amazing time because at the time my brother was working for the Ducks, so we had free tickets there, and I still remember when Paul Kariya got hit, and then I actually saw him coming out of the locker room because our seats were a little high above, but behind the Ducks bench, and we saw him come out. I mean, the place just went wild.
Yeah. I would imagine.
It was crazy.
I would have loved to have experienced that. God.
Yeah. It was one of the craziest times I've been seen live. I mean, just the volume of the place. That was, the pond at the time. I think Arrowhead Pond.
Yeah. So I think what I find, like, I don't want this to be like a downer in any way, shape, or form of like the invisibility of Asians. I think part of why, and I'm obviously, this is a lot of speculation, but just sort of observing the racial landscape of the U.S. and Canada, particularly of the U.S., is that it's very black and white here. And there are so many other minorities that get lost in the mix. And to a degree, rightfully so, right? Like the Black Americans have had quite the incredible struggle over the centuries on this continent. But that's not to say that other racial groups haven't felt the sting of that. And so to be able to have these conversations, to be able to say, hey, we're here, and hockey is an incredibly diverse sport with so many different people making contributions over 100 years. I mean, let's face it, like this was, there are all sorts of urban myths about how the game came about. There's the stories of the freed slaves who crossed the border up into Canada and developed a lot of the things that we know as being a part of hockey. There's the stories of hockey being pioneered by the indigenous people. And so over the years, of course, it's become a very white-dominated sport. But I do love to see when we have these kinds of conversations, and when more and more people are taking the reins and saying, no, we are very much a part of this sport, and we won't be invisible anymore. And I think it's powerful to see that, because I think diversity is really helpful to progress any activity, and sports especially.
Yeah. And, I think the landscape is changing, and we're slowly becoming more aware and, appreciative of the other participants in the game. So like you said, it's not just black and white. But I wouldn't say, I would say I've always felt it's also part of our Asian culture. I think a lot of us, the traditionalists, it's more of, hey, shy away from the attention, don't want the attention, the notoriety. Put your head down, work hard. It doesn't matter what color you are. If you work hard, you're gonna be rewarded. But I do think there's a younger generation that sees like, hey, wait, we do need some sort of acknowledgement. And that's with my account. I've always said, I've never tried to be an activist account where I'm like, pounding the table saying there needs to be more Asians in the game. It's more of, hey, look, did you know that there are these other people out here that used to play as well? Or did you know that Jamie Sora was half Japanese, right? Right. Sort of just, bring that sort of enlightenment and teaching, and sharing the stories.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where the beauty of your account lies, in that it's this incredible resource. And, I'll admit that I turned to your account to help me kind of flesh out my list for this season, and it's going to help me in future seasons. And I know like both you and Chad are behind the scenes in my chats, just feeding me info and helping the podcast out. So I appreciate both of you for the help that you've been, even in the short time that this pod has been going. And I'm going to be reaching out to you even more over the course of the season. So
and I'm more than happy to help, because I'm like pretty dogged in my research and looking. I can tell you, I can give you the stories about how I find players, right? At times it's because please tell us. Yeah, it's usually, especially, I would say, the vast majority of the Asian hockey players, they are, half Asians or Happas, right? So a lot of times I have to stalk their Instagrams, try to find pictures, usually of their moms, or, and even then you might not be able to figure it out. So then I have to start looking at like a LinkedIn and obituaries. And I've found a few players like through their obituaries where I'm like, okay, this guy is a quarter Japanese then, because his grandfather was Japanese, or as I mentioned before, like Dylan Gunther, right? He is of South Asian descent because his grandfather was a Patel. But that's something that's not publicized by the NHL much, and who knows why? Maybe it's a personal preference, but it's really interesting to see. And I think there's some people who say, it doesn't matter, race doesn't matter, but I think there's a large population on the other side. It just raises curiosity and raises interest, especially makes us. I always tell the story. There's been times where I've heard from Asian parents, and my kids play hockey, but hear from Asian parents, oh, there are no Asian hockey players in the NHL. I said, well, actually, there's Jason Robertson, there's Nick Robertson, there's Kaylor Yamamoto. I throw names out. I say, oh, you should follow this account and learn. And at one point, I remember there was one guy he was talking. He said, "Oh yeah, I saw this Instagram account that documents all the Asian hockey players. It's called Asian Hockey Card Collection." He was saying this to me just before I had my photo on it. So I was like, "Oh yeah,
okay,
that's me." So, but people do follow it, and I mean, follow it, or if they don't follow it, they do lurk a lot and stalk and use as a resource.
Yeah, it's so interesting too. Like the organization that I coach for is a nonprofit, and I coach in one of the chapters where there's a pretty big Taiwanese population, and we get a lot of those kids that are coming in trying out the sport, and the parents think it's interesting that there's this Asian guy out on the ice coaching their kids, and it does speak a lot to helping people feel like they belong in the sport, seeing people that look like you, which I think is incredibly powerful, and having that reassurance, like, yep, I belong here. I fit in this environment. So exactly. I mean, and I think that's ultimately what, when they shoot for hockey is for everyone. That's what we're really trying to build, is like make everybody feel comfortable, because I mean, as much as we want to believe that everybody is accepting and and has a good heart, we know that that's not always the case. I mean, especially my kid. I grew up. I mean, you probably grew up playing some hockey. I grew up with it too, being called every name under the sun. I mean, I tell the stories. I was, all the words, the C word because I'm part Chinese, I'm part Japanese. So the word, the N word. I've been called an Eskimo. At times it was all over the place, and that was from minor hockey all the way to college, and even maybe beer league too. It doesn't stop. And I thought, even nowadays, like it would be a little, with the tougher rules that all the minor hockey puts on, but my kids still get it too when we play out of state, and it's surprising to get from some of the places you hear it from. Yeah. So I'm curious, over the course of you collecting hockey cards over the last however many years you've been doing this, is there any interesting facts or trivia that you've come across as you've picked up some Asian hockey cards?
Oh yeah, that's the cool thing about cards, is that there are a lot of, if you study the cards, or if you start, if you look at a card and you start researching there are a lot of interesting stories. And I started just trying to think of some for your podcast. But one is I posted recently on my Instagram stories, but Jim Pack, the first Korean player, he won a Stanley Cup with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yeah. There was a time, I think it was shortly after, maybe when he became more of a veteran. If you look at some of the hockey cards, you'll see he actually has, in white writing, I think he probably used whiteout or paint on his own gloves, on the cuff of his gloves, like some Korean writing. And from what I look, at least there's only a few cards where you can see it's visible, and I think it says his name in Korean, but and I don't know if it was something he changed, game in and game out, or as the seasons went on, if he changed what the words, what the writing says. But that was one cool thing about a card. Similarly, I don't know, there's when you start digging into the stories, if I don't know if you follow on the Abbotsford Canucks, with Jet Wu, right? He's a defense.
Yes, I think you sent me his name.
Yeah. So he's a Chinese Canadian defenseman. But the really cool thing is, one is that his dad was Larry Wu, who played in the WHL.
Oh, okay.
And Larry Wu, if you watch the movie Goon, where they have the Asian hockey player who's also the medic, that's Larry Wu. That's Jet Wu's dad.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Winnipeg. And so they have a younger brother, Jonah, Jonah Wu, he's an NHL prospect now. And the interesting fact about Jet is he was actually named after Jet Li. I think when Jet Li was coming over to make a movie, he was going to stay at Jet Wu's or Larry's family's house. So they named Jet Wu after Jet Li, the actual actor.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then as I mentioned, Jamie Storr, not a lot of people realize, I knew because he was a longtime Kings fan. He was a King for a while. And there were a couple pieces about him, holding events for the Japanese American communities out here. But a lot of people outside the Kings organization or Kings fans don't realize that he was half Japanese. And if you look at a lot of his cards, you'll see on his mask, he actually has a Japanese dragon, and that was in honor of his mother, who he said he felt a very close bond to growing up, and she was of Japanese descent. So, but if you look at the cards, you can see you'll see some of them do have him wearing the Japanese dragon painted onto his mask, and then just a lot of other stories. I mean, like Richard Park. I mean, I know you probably grew up watching him too, right? I mean, the fun fact is he grew up in Palos Verdes. That's where I grew up. So I kind of read about him growing up. I mean, he's a few years older than me, but his nephew is Aiden Park, who is I think he's 18 now. He was passed over in this last year's draft, but he will probably. I think he's going to go in the second or third round this year.
Yeah.
You'll see. I mean, and we knew about him in Southern California because everybody's been watching this guy since he was a peewee. But that's a interesting connection. And then I don't know. Are you familiar with Taro Tsujimoto?
Well, so I do have the name slated for a future episode to talk about, and that, of course, is a funny story, but it becomes infuriating when you really dig into it. But sure, is there actually a card?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if that's what you're talking about, the infuriating part, but yes, there was a card of 2011. There's very few of them. Panini/Score published this card, and it is of Taro Tsujimoto. It has the whole backstory about him being the hoax, for the Tokyo Katanas. But they have a player depicted on it, and the player depicted, it's an old grainy photo. Okay. It's of I thought this is what you're talking about. It's probably the cultural misappropriation. It's actually of a hockey player named John Lee, who was of Chinese descent, but he was an NHL licensee. Wow. So I think he allowed his image to be used for the card, and there's a whole backstory to that as well. But I mean, that's always a cool one. And then, like I said, you just dig into some of the stories too.
Yeah.
Like, Yutaka Fukufuji was the first, Japanese goalie, and he played for the Kings, out by Kings. It's funny, a card, it was a custom card I made of a player named Dan Kim. Okay. I actually grew up, when I was at UCLA, I think Dan Kim was playing for Santa Monica College, and we had a scrimmage, but I don't think he actually went to the college. I think he was he was one of those, ringer players. But then Dan actually was playing a few games in the minor leagues for even the Bakersfield Condors. And he had told me, like, well, at one point he was playing with Fukufuji, and whenever Dan would walk out of the locker room, the press would chase over him and try to start an interview. I think he was Fukufuji. He was like, no, I'm the Korean guy. Right?
Wow.
Or like,
that's incredible.
Another story, like when I was trying to do my research on players like Steve Sugiura, who was, pretty prolific minor league scorer. There was a really cool story that I had read about Mike Milbury. And so there was a time, I think they were playing up in Quebec somewhere. Okay. And they said whenever Steve would get on the ice, the organist would play the stereotypical Chinese song. And,
oh boy.
Whenever Steve got out there, and the story goes that Mike Milbury actually jumped over the bench, tried to run up the stands to beat the crap out of the organist. And so you hear a lot of bad things about Milbury. When I hear that, that's pretty cool that he would do that for one of his players. He gets so enraged. But
that's incredible.
The cards, I think, do give you an idea of the player, and there might be some stories there. And then when you look into it deeper, there is a whole rich history that goes with each of these players, and their probably their struggles, their accolades to get where they were, and that's what I try to highlight in my Instagram account. At times it's difficult to find the sources because sometimes these players only go through up to the ECHL or up through junior,
right.
So I have to rely on social media or sometimes they're LinkedIn to figure out whatever happened to them.
Right. Yeah. Wow, Chris, we could talk for hours on end, I'm sure. And I hope that by having you on this one time, we've opened the door to potentially other other appearances, maybe a little hockey historian segment every so often,
Yeah,
if you're willing to pop in every once in a while.
I love the subject. I could talk about it for hours.
Yeah.
And I would love to always jump on whenever you need help or be a resource. And even if it's just, DMing me on Instagram or email, go ahead. I mean, I love to hear the feedback.
Awesome.
And also, it's always great when people I do have some followers who give me tips like, hey, have you heard of this person? He's actually, Asian. Because there are a lot of people who are quarter Asian or players who are quarter Asian or eighth. You would never have no idea.
Right. No, absolutely.
But then you find out the family history that they do. Their grandfather was Chinese.
Yeah.
And it's really
and you've done that for me as well. So I appreciate, even after listening to the first episode and you sent me a message, hey, you've got a couple names here that you should add in next time you do the list. Like, absolutely.
Yeah. So like I said, I think it's great. I hope that together we can build this sort of network or resource for people so they can learn more about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a blast. Where can people find you? Obviously, I've listed out the name of your website and your Instagram account a few times, but now to kind of close this out, what is the name of your Instagram account, and can people find you anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is through the Instagram account. It's at Asian Hockey Card Collection. I also do have an email address that's set up for it's Asian Hockey Card Collection at gmail.com. So you can feel free to reach out to me there. And also I know that we mentioned it on the last, you mentioned on your last podcast, but if you go to my Instagram account, there is a link to the petition. I know you have the petition up on your podcast too for Larry Kwong, to get him into the Hockey Hall of Fame. I think it would be a huge step for hockey and everyone for hockey fans all over the world if Larry does get that acknowledgement. It'll happen soon. Just depends on when.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you again, Chris. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.
Great. Thanks, Nate.
Okay, that about does it for this episode. Next week, we'll try to take a look at some of the playoff action thus far. Hopefully, we'll talk a bit about some hockey jargon and maybe even give a little nod to hockey in the movies. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you've heard, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and share this podcast with your friends. We're still in the process of getting things refined and polished around here, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on all the amazing conversations we'll be having on the show. To keep up with us on socials, follow us on Instagram at Asians in Hockey and on Blue Sky at asiansinhockey.com, and please feel free to shoot me an email at asiansinhockey@gmail.com. Asians in Hockey is part of the Podcast Potluck Collective. Visit podcastpotluck.com for more. See you next time on the Asians in Hockey podcast.